What did your school waste money on that everyone hated? Story 1. TVs, like just random TVs in the hallway that showed slideshows and tens of thousands of dollars when we could have just put up bulletin boards. Story 2. So, back when I was still in schools, we had a combined lunch of 7th and 8th, ninth and 10th, and 1st and 12th graders sharing lunch times. The school thought it would be wise to spend a ton of money on fake mashed potatoes instead of actual mashed potatoes. This was a huge issue because the old mashed potatoes actually weren't that horrible. But some idiot helicopter mom thought her poor Susie was getting too many starches during school and raised hell. It was this unholy abomination combo of water and powdered, I don't know, something. The kids were understandably furious because they were forced to ingest this gruel that they wouldn't feed actual prisoners. Either way, it looked like mashed potatoes in a way, but it was slimy and would stick to the tables, floor, or sometimes walls. The school started to notice kids were taking spoonfuls of mashed potatoes and flinging it at the wall, making it stick. This ended up in a lot of kids getting in trouble. The janitorial staff, bless them, having to clean up a ton of what looked like Satan's cur dripping off the walls and ceilings. And finally, a school-wide ban on eating mashed potatoes with spoons. Yeah, like we're going to eat mashed potatoes with forks like some basic bitch. We absolutely hated the school's decision, but for a few days it worked. Silence across the cafeteria, but there was a palpable anger for the rest of the administration. That's when it happened. I decided that enough was enough, and the school needed to bring back the good mashed potatoes. Hatched a plan with a few of the tables. We were going to all buy 34 cardboard bowls of this Newtonian concoction, and we were all going to have a huge food fight. Everyone was in on it. The school had to break out a backup 20-gallon drum of this sewer sludge and scoop it into our plates. Kids buying this by the handful. We were gearing up like it was our final march into the depths of hell to return to Satan personally his excess baby fluid. The attack was scheduled to begin with a simple battle cry. When the clock struck 12:01, I sounded the call to arms with a bellowing, "For mashed potatoes!" I hurled the first onslaught directly into the air. Like a scene from a movie, the potatoes flew across the air in slow motion. My aim was true. My trajectory lined up as if it was fired from a cannon. I hit my mark directly on the back of the vice principal. Before he could even turn around, it began. Screams of sheer terror by the janitorial staff as they dove behind trash bins and army crawled out of the door. Potato everywhere. An absolute bloodbath. We gave the intro to Saving Private Ryan a run for its money. It was pure chaos. Kids getting slammed in the face with this white mush, people ducking behind chairs and under tables, launching this gunk directly in the air without a target in sight, and yet still managing to find a mark each and every time. It was glorious. I was so proud as I stood there in the middle of it, arms raised out, gazing upon my hellish landscape. I'll never forget it. The stories of that day still get passed down from new student to new student. A day that would live in infamy. The Great Tater War of 2006. That is so hilarious. Sounds like so much fun. I never knew you could have so much fun with potatoes. Story 3. After having shitty computers that kept breaking down, the school received a grant. They could spend the money on whatever they wanted. They installed these fingerprint machines in the food hall so that you could top up an account with money. You would go to the machine with the money, scan your print, and then go to the food place and scan your print again to pay. This was because they claimed that it would stop kids bullying each other and stealing their money. You still had to bring the money in to put it on your account, so it made zero difference. We never did get new computers. Story 4. We have chairs that you could sit on while you were waiting outside the classroom for class to start. People around with them a lot, and they were trashed, so our awesome janitor volunteered to make new ones by himself to reduce costs. So the school funded the material cost. They were really nice, but they got immediately. So the school ended up having to buy new ones anyway. We didn't deserve it. Why did the janitor even think that he should waste his time making new chairs? Did he really think they were going to last and the kids weren't going to mess them up? Story 5. Our high school expanded by building another campus just off site. Rather than build a second school completely separate, which was needed, our school had over 3,000 students. They built half of a school about a quarter mile away. All new freshmen had courses in the second campus, but many sophomores and juniors had classes at both. You'd often see kids running from one end of campus to the other because they had 8 minutes to go from one side to the other. If you had to go to the bathroom or stop at your locker. Oh, and it was atop a hill, so it wasn't just a casual stroll to the other campus. It was a hike. Administrators tried to give students a little extra time, but as you can imagine, high school kids took advantage of that and would show up to class 20 minutes late every day. So they cut that out. The school enacted a policy where if you had 3 tardies in a week, you got lunch detention. After 3 lunch detentions over any period of time, you got Saturday detention, which was 6 hours sitting in the gym on Saturday with a pissed off teacher trying to keep everyone quiet. What they should have done was keep the separate campus to freshmen only. It was big enough to contain the 700 to 800 freshmen at our school, but they it up. Story 6. I was really looking forward to my second year of speech and debate too, which was competition debate. Class time was spent practicing for the 6 or small competitions we participated in. Small school, graduating class just shy of 100. A few weeks before the trimester started, I was told I needed to adjust my schedule due to a class being dropped. The speech class had been removed due to budget. Our budget was only $200 and we already paid nearly every expense out of pocket. No chance to have a fundraiser, nothing. Just drop the class. That spring, they started construction of our new $4 million gym. Our existing gym was structurally fine and never ran out of room for any occasion. This was a year after they spent close to $1 million classing up the football field. Me, for thinking academics was more important than sports. Go team. I have noticed that so many schools are spending a ton of money on sports facilities. Are kids actually going to become professional athletes? Because if not, for the most part, I would think it would be a complete waste of money. Just keep it simple. Spend less on things like sports. Story 7. I got this. My school held some huge fundraiser to essentially extend the size of our school. They raised a lot of money and got one of our 3 main buildings built. They had a spare $100,000 left over, so they had 2 options: buy air conditioning for the library and one of the other buildings, or buy one of the main execs of our school a new BMW Z3. They ended up buying the car for this bloke. A few years later, it was discovered he was embezzling funds from the school. Story 8. Worried about traffic on a main road through campus? They blocked it off and made it into a sort of concrete plaza. It had a lot of steps and railings, but nowhere to actually sit. There was no shade at all, so it was too hot in the summer. And in the winter, the wind whistled between the buildings on either side and buried the plaza in snow. No one ever used it. In fact, out of curiosity, I just checked Google Maps and its road again, LOL. Here's to every time I had to weave through the narrow back roads between buildings to get from one side to the other. That definitely sounds like a waste of money. What exactly was the purpose of this plaza thing anyway? They could have at least designed it so it would become something useful. Story 10. A Mac lab in my high school. It was meant to be for video editing, Photoshop, and creative projects in general. It was supposed to be for the media students only. But in the end, everyone was banned from using it because somebody stole a mouse from one of the computers. The amount of money that we spent on it could have been used to field the school's first ice hockey team, which we had wanted. For more than one grad party, our year didn't have one due to lack of funds. Or just to be ghettoized, the school in general. It's not all bad though. For one, The year after, they got the hockey team going and had a grad party. The hockey team lost all 20 or so games that year. The party was apparently lame, and to this day, the school still remains ghetto. Story 11. I'm sure that many of the schools mentioned here have indeed misused funds, but I feel that there's been something largely overlooked that's worth mentioning. It's incredibly common for a school, public elementary school, private research institution, or anything in between, to receive donations or grant money for very specific things. That money cannot legally be spent on anything else. If, for instance, a particularly pitifully funded school needs to purchase new textbooks for a classroom, but receives a large donation from a well-meaning local to build a shiny new pool facility, they must legally build a shiny new pool facility. It does not matter that the money was solely needed elsewhere. The school's administration usually has no power to reappropriate funds. That's crazy. So perhaps this is the reason why so many school funds in so many schools seem to get just used for all kinds of useless things. Seems to me this is a waste of taxpayers' money, and any spending of school funds should be carefully monitored and planned. Story 12. The goddamn outdoor classroom. Incoming rant. In grade 7, the principal spent $10,000 on ugly rocks and these dumbass grassy mounds so kids could learn outside. The school had less than 200 kids, so $10,000 was a lot of the budget. All this little piece of trash did was rot while taking up our schoolyards. Plot twist, that stupid grass mounds had baby rabbits in them that were murdered by the grubby elementary school kids and their grabbing hands. Plot twist. The electric boogaloo half of the rocks were on the neighboring church's property. The principal spent even more money building a giant-ass fence around the church, so the school felt even more like a prison and cut half of the playground we'd had for the past 9 years. I hope that the principal ran the school into the ground after that, because she sure ruined my time there. Rant. I might need help. Story 13. My college had a couple of things that students continually bitched about. The flowers. It was rumored that the flower budget was around $100,000 a year. Private school, private budget. And it was pretty believable because every 2 weeks, new flowers were going in, even in the winter time. The clock, this big-ass ugly clock, was erected right in front of our dining hall. And while I realized it was probably a gift sponsored by a donor, that money should have been allocated to something else. It even had the III instead at IV at 4, which was irritating. The auditorium was renovated, and they installed ridiculously expensive Italian marble in the foyer. It looked fantastic, but considering we were a sports-heavy school with a small handful of artsy kids, it was a big waste. I understand them wanting to make the school look nice, with some flowers here and there and a little bit of vegetation, but $100,000 a year, that sounds like, kind of overdoing it. Story 14. I'm in a small all-boys private school, and recently they employed a business manager who is on £45,000 and does nothing but buy unnecessary things. For instance, last month, he bought 80 iPad minis so that we can sign in when we arrive and leave school, which is totally not necessary. It's just a waste of time and money. I thought a business manager was there to budget and to manage the school's financial spending. If they get rid of him, hey, could be saving plenty. Story 15. My district had to build a bigger high school because the one we already had was too small, and it was changed into a middle school for 7th graders. They hired a new company that didn't specialize in building schools to build a new high school, which was their first ever project. The school was supposed to be 3 stories in the shape of a square. They messed up the ground level, and the 2nd and 3rd floors were in the shape of a U. To recap, the school was supposed to be 3 floors in the shape of a square. The ground floor is a square, and the 2nd and 3rd floors are U-shaped. The reason everyone hated it was because it was harder to get to your classes if you were on the other side of the school. How could you mess up turning a square into a U? Again, that is definitely a good example of a complete waste of money. Story 16. A new building. They paid about £75 million for Stephen Hall to design an absolutely awful boxy eco chamber that has more circulation than studio space. Then their old building, which was considered the best building in the UK for the past 250 years, burned down. It's absolutely hilarious how much of a cluster my university was. But that's what you get for going to art school. Though I studied architecture. Story 17. The entire school. My high school was originally incorporated and built in the 1950s and was built in the trend-setting open campus model. Every classroom led outdoors, and the gym, auditorium, was a completely separate building. It was the school my father graduated from. By the time I got there in 2000, it was dripping with character, quite literally, from every faucet, hole in the ceiling, and geysers spurting up from the floor in the math wing. But did we love that school. We had complete run of it. Murals everywhere, freedom, encouragement, actually, to go outside between classes. We were encouraged to use the outside paths because the hallway was too crowded, and it was literally impossible to get to one end of the school to the other in the 6 minutes allotted between classes. Eat your lunch outside in the courtyard because there's not enough tables and seats in the cafeteria. But we owned that school. But looming behind was a $51 million state-of-the-art facility that opened up my junior year. It really was beautiful. Olympic-sized pool, four-court field house with indoor track, 32-inch TV in every classroom, brand new football field, etc., etc. And we hated it. We weren't allowed outside. There was a fully enclosed courtyard that we weren't allowed out in for security reasons. We weren't even allowed to have bottled water outside of the cafeteria for fear of messing up the brand new $51 million state-of-the-art facility. The custodians were actually instructed to go through classroom trash bins and report any food wrappers. I had a teacher who would take his home in his briefcase. My fellow class officers and I fought administration tooth and nail to be allowed to have our graduation on the football field, as had always been tradition. To deaf ears, because it would ruin the field. At the end of that first year, during the senior class night, they showed the senior documentary, and at one point, they showed footage of the old school, and all the students cheered, and then booed the next frame when they showed the new school. My mom, who had actually served on the building committee, was livid at how ungrateful we were. But how do you explain that to us, that knew both, the old school meant freedom, while the new school felt like a very fancy prison? In any case, it was only my class and the ones surrounding that ever knew. My sister and her class never knew any different. And the freshmen there now weren't even alive when the old school was still standing. That is a really good point. I think the freedom aspect, the old school, was so much more important than all this fancy stuff that cost millions, that everybody is afraid of breaking or getting dirty or whatever. Freedom is so much more important. Click on one of the videos on the screen now, or Karen will sue you.